When my sister called me jealous because she inherited the beach house, I laughed it off. But when the trust documents arrived at noon a week later, the truth didn't just sting, it shattered everything I thought I knew about our family. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Rena. I'm 32, and my sister Mara is 2 years older. We grew up in Cape Haven, a small town by the coast where everyone knows your last name and your business. After our parents passed away a few months ago, all that was left was their savings, some furniture, and the beach house our father built when we were kids. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of memories, summer nights, sand between our toes, our mother's laughter echoing through the porch. At the reading of the will, Mara sat beside me looking confident. The lawyer cleared his throat and read the words that changed everything. The house would go to Mara, for her stability and future family. I was given a small cash amount and a few personal items. I tried to keep a calm face, but my stomach twisted. Mara turned to me with that smug little smile she'd worn since high school and said, "Don't act jealous, Rena. You never even liked the beach anyway." Her words burned. I forced a smile and said nothing, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't just about the house. It was about being treated like I didn't matter. My father had always said he wanted things to be fair between us. So why would he do this? That night, I sat in my apartment staring at an old photo of Dad. He was standing in front of the beach house, one hand resting on the porch rail. Behind him, just barely visible, was a small locked drawer built into the wall of his study. I remembered asking him once what was inside, and he'd only smiled and said, "Things that matter, Rena." The memory made my chest tighten. Something didn't feel right. My father was careful, almost secretive, about financial matters. Maybe the will wasn't the whole story. I tried to shake off the thought, but it wouldn't leave me. Just before midnight, my phone rang. It was our family lawyer. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Rena," he said, "there's something else you should see. Your father left additional trust files. They'll be delivered to you by courier at noon tomorrow. Don't mention this to anyone yet, especially Mara." I hung up and sat frozen in silence. The waves outside crashed softly against the shore, the sound I'd always found peaceful now carrying a strange tension. I looked again at my father's picture, his faint smile seeming almost knowing. Noon couldn't come fast enough. Something told me the truth inside that envelope would change everything. At exactly noon, the delivery man handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope with the law firm's seal pressed across the flap. My fingers trembled as I signed for it. The weight of it felt strange, heavier than paper should be. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time just staring at my name written in my father's neat handwriting. When I finally tore it open, a faint scent of his cologne escaped, the kind he always wore to work. Inside was a sealed trust document and a folded note. The handwriting was familiar, looping and steady. It said, "Read this only when you're ready to know the truth about loyalty." The words chilled me. Loyalty? To whom? And why would he write something like that? My pulse quickened as I opened the trust file. The first few pages looked ordinary. Legal terms, property listings, signatures. But halfway through, I found a paragraph that stopped me cold. It talked about conditions tied to the inheritance and something called a property reassignment clause. I didn't understand what it meant, but the phrasing was clear enough to know the beach house wasn't as secure in Mara's hands as she thought. I stared at those words for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to call the lawyer again, but instead, I dialed Mara. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and casual, like she'd been expecting my call. "Hey, little sister," she said. "Got something on your mind?" "I got something from the law firm today," I said slowly. "Dad left a trust document. It mentioned conditions and—" "Oh, that," she interrupted, laughing. "Yeah, Dad loved his little mystery. Probably some old paperwork he forgot to shred. Don't overthink it, Rena. You always do." Her laugh lingered in my ear long after the call ended. I wanted to believe her, but the way she'd rushed to brush it off made my stomach twist. She always did that, tried to make me feel foolish for asking questions. That night, I lay awake listening to the creak of the old apartment ceiling, my thoughts running circles. The note kept replaying in my mind. The truth about loyalty. What truth? What had Dad wanted me to find? Around midnight, I gave up trying to sleep. I grabbed my coat and drove to our parents' house. The place was dark and quiet, the air filled with dust and salt from the nearby sea. The attic stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed. Up there, old boxes were stacked to the ceiling, faded labels written in Mom's handwriting. I started opening them one by one. Photos, tax papers, receipts, yellowed letters. Then I found one marked simply personal, keep safe. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were files I'd never seen before, and one familiar-looking leather book with my father's initials burned into the cover. I knew then that whatever secret he'd left behind had only just begun to surface. The attic was silent except for the soft thud of dust falling from the beam. I knelt beside the box marked personal, keep safe, and pulled out the old leather book with my father's initials pressed into the cover. The spine cracked when I opened it, and the smell of aged paper filled the air. Every line inside was written in his steady handwriting, the same script that once labeled our school lunches and birthday cards. At first, I thought it was just another journal. But as I flipped through the pages, the numbers started to make sense. Deposits, transfers, dates carefully written down. I leaned closer, tracing the amounts with my finger. Each entry listed the same recipient, Mara Collins. The amounts weren't small either. Thousands sent year after year. The earliest one dated back nearly a decade. My stomach dropped. Why would Dad keep such detailed record? And why were all the payments to her? My hands felt cold, and I realized I was holding my breath. The more I turned the pages, the clearer it became. He had known exactly where his money was going. A thin piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I bent down to pick it up. It was a torn photograph, faded around the edges. Dad stood on the porch of the beach house, his jaw tight, his hand raised mid-gesture. In front of him was Mara, her face twisted in anger, eyes red as if she'd been crying. The photo looked like it had been ripped in half on purpose. My heart pounded. The argument must have been about the money. Maybe the house too. The thought of them fighting over it before he died made my chest ache. I needed answers, not guesses. The next morning, I drove straight to the law firm. The secretary gave me a cautious look when I asked for Mr. Harlan, but she waved me in. He was standing by the window when I entered, his hands tucked behind his back like he'd been expecting me. I found something, I said quietly, setting the ledger on his desk. You knew about this, didn't you? He adjusted his glasses, avoiding my eyes. Your father kept detailed accounts, he said slowly. He was worried about certain irregularities. Irregularities, I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. He sighed. He suspected your sister had been taking funds meant for the family business. He never got the chance to confront her properly before his passing. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. My throat tightened as I stared at the ledger, the numbers that once meant nothing now forming a map of betrayal. So the beach house, I whispered. It wasn't a gift. Mr. Harlan looked at me for a long time before answering. No, Rena. It was supposed to be proof of trust. But maybe he already knew that trust was gone. I left the office holding the ledger close to my chest, the truth heavier than the book itself. Mara called the next morning, her voice smooth and careful. She said she wanted to clear the air, that we'd both said and done things out of grief. I hesitated, but curiosity outweighed caution. If she wanted to play nice, I wanted to see how far she'd go. She invited me to dinner at the beach house the following evening. When I arrived, the place looked different from how I remembered it. The porch lights glowed evenly, every cushion lined up perfectly, every surface spotless. It was too perfect, too staged, like a magazine spread. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something artificial, as if she'd tried to scrub the past off the walls. Mara opened the door wearing a pale blue dress and a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm glad you came, she said. It's been tense, hasn't it? Tense, I repeated, stepping inside. That's one word for it. She led me to the dining room where the table was set with candles and polished silverware. The clink of plates echoed too loudly in the quiet room. We made small talk about work, neighbors, weather, anything but the will or our father. Her laughter sounded practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. When she poured the wine, I finally mentioned it. I've been looking over Dad's trust documents, I said lightly. There was an addendum I hadn't seen before. Her hand froze midair. The fork she was holding slipped from her fingers and clattered against the plate. For a second, her smile vanished. Then she forced a laugh. Oh, that? I'm sure it's just some legal fluff. Dad always loved to make things complicated, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She looked away too quickly, pretending to check on the oven. I said nothing more and let the silence stretch between us. After dinner, she brought out a store-bought pie and cut it neatly, asking if I wanted coffee. I nodded, waiting until she disappeared into the kitchen. The moment I heard the kettle hiss, I slipped down the hall. The office door was half open. Inside, the desk lamp glowed softly, illuminating a pile of folders. I moved quickly, every sound of the house amplified, the hum of the fridge, the soft crash of waves outside. My heart pounded as I opened one folder after another until I found them, bank statements. Dozens of them, organized by year. The amounts were unmistakable. The same numbers I'd seen in my father's ledger, right down to the dates. Large withdrawals, transfers from accounts in his name into her, some labeled as reimbursements, others left blank. I snapped a quick picture of the top page with my phone and slid everything back exactly as I'd found it. By the time Mara returned with the coffee, I was back at the table, pretending to study the candle flame. She smiled again, too wide, too nervous. That night, as I drove away, The beach house lights glimmered in my rearview mirror, bright, sterile, and full of lies. Morning light poured through the blinds, sharp and colorless. I sat at the kitchen table with the trust document spread out before. The pages were wrinkled from how many times I had read them, but something about the spacing on the last sheet kept nagging at. I ran my hand over the paper, feeling a faint texture beneath the printed line. Curious, I held it up to the window. The sunlight caught something invisible before, faint embossed text pressed into the paper itself. I tilted the page until the words appeared clearly enough to read. All property transfers contingent upon proof of integrity in financial dealing. My breath caught. Integrity. That single word turned everything upside down. The house hadn't been an unconditional gift. My father had built a safeguard right into the document, one that Mara must have overlooked. I folded the page carefully and drove straight to Mr. Harlan's office. He looked surprised to see me so early, but I didn't wait for pleasantry. I set the document on his desk, pointing to the faint text. "Explain this," I said. He put on his glasses, leaning forward. His brow furrowed as he read, and then he nodded slowly. "Your father was deliberate with his wording. This clause means that any property transfer can be revoked if there's proof of dishonest conduct related to family assets. In that case, it reverts to the next rightful heir." "The next rightful heir," I repeated softly. He looked up at me, his voice measured. "That would be you, Rena." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My father had known something wasn't right. He'd hidden this clause knowing it might one day be needed. I left the office clutching the page like it might vanish if I let go. That night, I began to gather everything. The ledger, the photograph, and now the copies of Mara's statements I'd taken. I spread them across the table, aligning dates and numbers, building a timeline that told a story even without words. Each document fit together like puzzle pieces forming a pattern of deceit. Then I remembered something I hadn't checked, the old desk drawers Dad used for bills and receipts. I drove to the house again, this time alone. The drawers stuck at first but finally gave way, spilling a mix of letters and check stubs. My hands sifted through them until one caught my eye, faded ink, Dad's handwriting across the top. The name on it made my stomach tighten, Mara Collins. The amount was large, and beside it, the note read loan repayment. It didn't make sense. He hadn't borrowed from her. He'd been paying her back for something that didn't exist. Or maybe it was the other way around. Money he'd given that she claimed was repayment. Either way, it was another thread in a web she'd spun for years. I tucked the check stub into a folder marked proof. My father's words echoed in my mind, truth and loyalty. This time, I intended to honor both. The air smelled like salt and rosemary when Mara opened the door, smiling in that way people do when they're trying too hard. She looked surprised to see the bottle of red wine in my hand. "Peace offering?" I said lightly. She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. The house was quieter than before. No candles, no polished gleam, just the sound of the ocean outside and the faint hum of the refrigerator. We sat at the kitchen table, and I poured 2 glasses. She raised hers and said, "To starting over." I smiled, though my chest was tight. "To Dad," I replied. Her eyes flickered for a moment. I started talking about old summers at the beach, how Dad used to fall asleep on the porch swing, how he always burned the first batch of burgers. I let my words wander, soft and slow, until she relaxed. The more she drank, the looser her tone became. "He loved that house," I said, tracing the rim of my glass. "He built it with his own hands. He always said everything he had, he worked for." Mara let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, he worked. And judged. He couldn't understand when people struggled." I looked at her carefully. "You mean you?" Her shoulders stiffened. "You don't know what it was like," she muttered. The business was falling apart. I had bills, investors breathing down my neck. I borrowed from Dad, and he made it sound like I'd robbed him. "So you took the money," I said softly. She stared into her glass. "I had no choice. I thought I could pay it back before he noticed. But he found out." The words hung between us. I didn't move. "What did he say?" Her voice dropped. "He said he'd fix it in the will. Said he couldn't let dishonesty go unpunished." I felt my pulse quicken. "Fix it how?" She gave a bitter smile, eyes glassy with wine and guilt. "He didn't get the chance." My heart stopped. "What do you mean by that?" Her expression faltered. The color drained from her face. She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling around the stem of her glass. For a moment, I thought she might say more, but instead, she stood abruptly and went to the sink, running the tap too long, staring at nothing. "Mara," I said quietly. No response. Just the sound of water hitting porcelain, steady and harsh. I watched her shoulders rise and fall, the tension carved into her posture. Finally, she turned off the faucet and whispered, almost to herself, "You should go, Rena." I didn't argue. I left my half-empty glass on the counter and walked out, my mind spinning. The night air outside was cold, but it felt easier to breathe. Her words echoed over the waves behind me, unfinished, haunting, dangerous. The next morning, I drove to the law office with the folder clutched in my lap. Inside were the ledger pages, copies of the bank statements, the check stub, and the memory of Mara's unfinished confession echoing like a warning. Mr. Harlan was already in when I arrived. He looked up from his desk, concern flickering in his eyes as I laid everything out before. She admitted taking the money, I said quietly. She said Dad planned to fix it in the will but didn't get the chance. He adjusted his glasses, his expression grave. That's a serious claim, Rena. Do you have anything else? I handed him the photograph, the trust page with the embossed clause, and a printed summary of the financial record. He read in silence for several minutes, turning each page slowly, methodically. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. This is enough to trigger a full audit under the trust's integrity clause. If deception can be verified, the estate can be reopened. Meaning? I asked, barely above a whisper. Meaning the property could legally revert to you. The room went still. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of papers as he began organizing the evidence into neat stacks. Then he picked up the phone, calling the firm's auditor and requesting an immediate review. His calm professionalism didn't mask the gravity of what was happening, the kind of process that didn't just uncover numbers, but truths people spent years hiding. By the end of the day, the formal notice had been sent. The audit was official. Within 48 hours, word began to spread. Cape Haven was small, and secrets never stayed buried long. People started whispering at the cafe, the post office, the corner store. Questions traveled faster than facts, and Mara's name came up in every conversation. I overheard someone at the gas station saying the beach house might not be hers after all. Someone else mentioned the investigation. The sound of gossip should have felt satisfying, but it only made my stomach turn. I didn't want humiliation, I wanted truth. Still, I couldn't stop what was already in motion. That evening, as I sat by the window sorting through more documents, my phone rang. Her name lit the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice came sharp and venomous. You think you've won something, Rena? You think this is over? I stayed silent, letting her rage fill the space between us. You've ruined everything, she hissed. You have no idea what's coming. Then the line went dead. I stared at my reflection in the dark window, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the waves were crashing hard against the shore, louder than usual, like the sea itself was warning me that the storm hadn't even begun. The hearing took place in a quiet courthouse room with pale walls and a long oak table polished to a shine. I sat beside Mr. Harlan, the documents spread neatly before us. Across the table, Mara fidgeted with her bracelet, her face pale but her jaw tight. The estate trustees filed in, 3 older professionals who spoke softly but carried an air of authority that filled the room. When the session began, Mr. Harlan rose first. His voice was calm and steady as he presented the evidence. The ledger pages, the bank withdrawals, the check stub, the trust clause. He spoke without embellishment, each fact laid bare like a thread being pulled from a tightly woven fabric. The panel members took notes, occasionally exchanging glances. Mara interrupted halfway through. This is ridiculous, she said sharply. My father gave me that house because he trusted me. Mr. Harlan didn't flinch. Your father's trust was conditional, he replied. The clause makes that clear. She crossed her arms, eyes flashing. You're twisting his words. The lead trustee leaned forward. Ms. Collins, did you receive large transfers from your father's accounts prior to his passing? Her silence stretched too long. Finally, she muttered. They were loans. He wanted to help. Another trustee asked, were these loans documented? Mara shifted in her chair, her voice faltering. No, but he said he'd fix it. He said he'd change the will if he had to. The words hung in the air like a dropped glass shattering in slow motion. The room went completely still. Mr. Harlan looked at me, then back at the panel. So, the lead trustee said slowly, you're confirming your father intended to alter the will because of concerns about these financial transfers? Mara blinked rapidly, realizing too late what she'd admitted. That's not what I meant, she stammered. He never did it. The panel exchanged quiet whispers. Papers shuffled. Pens clicked. Mara's composure began to unravel. She twisted her bracelet until it snapped, the small sound breaking the silence. After several minutes, the trustees returned their attention to us. The lead member cleared his throat. Based on the documentation and today's testimony, it's evident that the conditions of the trust were violated. The inheritance is therefore void under the integrity clause. He paused, glancing toward me. Ownership of the property will transfer to the next rightful heir, as designated by the trust. Mara's breath hitched. I sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling the air leave the room in one long exhale. The decision was final. The beach house, the symbol of everything broken between us, now belonged to me. Mara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but she only stared at me, eyes full of disbelief and fury, before storming out. When the door closed, the sound echoed through the room like the end of a chapter one hadn't meant to write. The drive to Cape Haven felt different this time. The sky hung low, the horizon pale and quiet. The sea wind carried a chill that crept into the car as I turned down the familiar dirt road. When the beach house came into view, it didn't look triumphant or grand, just still, waiting. I parked and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The porch boards creaked the same way they always had. I walked to the edge and stopped in the exact place where my father once stood in that torn photograph. The ocean was calm now, gentle waves rolling against the sand. For a long moment, I just stood there listening. No shouting, no accusations, only wind and salt and the soft rhythm of water against wood. When I finally went inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Everything was as Mara had left it, but the house felt stripped of its pretense. The rooms were empty of tension, only echoes remaining. I walked through slowly, touching the edges of furniture, tracing the grooves my father's hands had once carved. In the study, the late afternoon light slanted across the desk. Something caught my eye, a small square of yellowed tape on the underside of the drawer. I crouched down, pried it open, and felt paper brush against my fingers. A single envelope was taped there, edges brittle with age. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting, for the daughter who stayed honest. My throat tightened as I tore it open carefully. Inside was a folded letter, the ink faded but legible. Rena, it began, if you're reading this, it means the house has found its way back to you. I never built this place for wealth or comfort. I built it for truth, for a family that values what cannot be bought. People make mistakes, and forgiveness takes time, but integrity must always remain untouched. You may not understand now, but I trust you will someday. My eyes blurred as I read. His words weren't about money, not about fairness or punishment. They were about character, the one thing he believed could hold a person steady when everything else fell apart. Take care of this home, he wrote at the end. Let it remind you that love isn't proven through gifts, but through honesty kept when no one's watching. By the time I finished, tears had soaked the bottom of the page. I pressed it against my chest, feeling its weight like a heartbeat. Outside, the ocean shimmered in the fading light, calm and endless. I stood by the open window, breathing in the sea air, the sound of gulls circling above. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt returned, not just to me, but to what it was always meant to be. Dusk painted the sky in soft orange when I heard the knock. It was hesitant, almost apologetic. I opened the door and froze. Mara stood there, hair tangled by wind, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weeks had stripped away every ounce of pride. Hey, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I didn't speak right away. The silence between us carried the weight of everything that had happened. Her gaze drifted past me to the porch, to the sea beyond it. I heard you moved back in, she said. It looks peaceful. I nodded once. It is. She swallowed hard. I lost everything, Rena. The business, the car, the apartment. I thought I could rebuild, but no one wants to work with me now. I guess I earned that. There was no arrogance in her voice, just exhaustion. She took a shaky breath and met my eyes. I came to ask if I could see the ocean. Just one more time. The request hung in the air. I stepped aside without a word. She walked past me slowly, her steps careful, as if afraid the floor might reject her too. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of waves. She went straight to the porch and stopped at the railing, the same spot where our father used to stand. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the sand. For a moment, we both just watched it. She gripped the rail with both hands. He loved this view, she murmured. I used to think he cared more about this place than I shook my head. He cared about what it meant. This house was built on truth. That's what he wanted to protect. She turned to look at me, tears gathering but never falling. You think I could have changed if I'd told him everything back then? Maybe, I said quietly, but he gave chances until the end. You were the one who closed the door. Her shoulders slumped. The sound of the tide filled the silence that followed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and forced a small, broken smile. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know, I said. I'm just here to keep it standing. She nodded, understanding what I meant without needing more words. After a long moment, she stepped off the porch and walked down toward the sand. I stayed at the doorway, watching her figure move slowly along the shoreline until the colors of dusk swallowed her shape. The waves crashed again and again, steady and endless, washing over the footprints she left behind. When the last light faded, I closed the door softly, the echo blending with the sea, final, cleansing quiet. Hey besties, thanks for staying with me till the end of this wild family story. Imagine being called jealous over a beach house, only to uncover your sister's lies through your late dad's secret trust paper. Painful, right? But sometimes betrayal clears the path to truth. If you liked this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time. Bye.